Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. Is it time? You questioned eAuctions. Just what are they and when should you use them? So this is our Market Dojo's, I think, first internal webinar. Hopefully it's going to be one of many. We've had a lot of people register and we've got quite a number of questions which we'll try to cover as we go through the presentation. We're hoping the internet's going to hold out. If for any reason it does drop, don't worry, we have some risk mitigation in place and we're back online in just a second. So in today's webinar, what we're going to cover is a quick introduction to your hosts, myself and Nick, discussing eAuctions, what they are, why you use them, and how to run them. We have a bit of a live demonstration for you, a couple of polls, some handouts, and then we'll wrap up after around about an hour and 10 minutes or so. So here you can see some beautiful photos. Myself, Alun, on the left, and Nick Drewe on the right. We're both co-founders of Market Dojo. My background is engineering with Rolls-Royce. And then fell into procurement, as many people do, before working for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then selling engineering simulation software before I came back around to work for a boutique consultancy selling managed reverse auctions, where I was very fortunate to meet my colleague next to me, my esteemed colleague, Nick Drewe.
Thank you, Alan. You're too kind. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Drewe, one of the other co-founders of Market Dojo. My background, mechanic and engineer. Stemmed from my love of trying to understand how things work. But then I joined a boutique procurement consultancy where I ran many hundreds of eAuctions and developed a real passion for the quick return on investment and the efficient way in which they drove results. One of my favorite auctions of all time has to be for the landing gear of a Boeing 747. Something that perhaps not many of you would think possible to e-auction and put the trust of thousands into such an auction, but it delivered a fantastic result. And in fact, I remember it was a supplier in the Far East who had all the relevant accreditations who ended up winning, and it was quite a challenge to convince the stakeholder to go with them in the end, but I'm very pleased to say that they did, and it's been a fantastic supply partnership ever since. So in fact, for my sort of entire times at the consultancy, there's not many areas of spend that I haven't seen e-auctioned. So I hope to share a few stories with you today.
Wonderful, thanks, Nick. And with another Nick, which makes meetings quite confusing sometimes, Nick Martin, who's got a lot of experience in IT and technology. We set up Market Dojo back in, well, 2nd of August 2010. And we set up Market Dojo with a view to make e-auctions more accessible to a wider audience through an easy-to-use pay-as-you-go solution. And that was, well, 9 years ago. And since then, we've evolved.
Superb. So, yeah, our solution today, it encompasses everything from your spend analysis and going through raw data, right the way through to verifying savings with finance and the ongoing management of suppliers. The beauty of this kind of setup is that clients can jump in at any particular point along the journey, whether that's right at the beginning with the spend analysis, or whether just for an onboarding tool, or perhaps just to run an on-demand e-auction. We can sort of cater for all needs. So we have a product brochure that we can share with you at the end of this for any further details on any one of those particular modules. So our copy of the Breaking Bad e-auction categories here. You can see from this that we've seen many different categories of auction go through the tool. I know one of the questions that you guys had during the survey was, how do you pick a category for auction? We'll go through that in more detail later, but fundamentally we've seen a lot of different goods and services be e-auctioned over the years. We actually wrote an A to Z article for Spend Matters on reverse auctions, one for each letter of the alphabet. You had to pardon a little bit of poetic license for the X and the Z. There weren't many categories that came to mind. We didn't have any xylophones going through the tool at the time. So we kind of cheated a little bit, went with Xerox print management and Zebra print consumables, which I'm informed are particular brands of printing that ended up being very, very good auctions in the end. But generally speaking, we see about 800 reverse auctions a month go through Market Dojo. We have had people e-auction a car for themselves, pitting Skoda against VW, against Audi, for just a single purchase of a vehicle. So if any of you in the crowd would like to buy a new car anytime soon, then bear in mind an auction. You never know. There's liquidity, there's definition, so it could potentially work. We've also seen up to £150 million worth of supermarket meat go through the tool as an auction, and that's definitely not horse meat. I'd just like to add that on.
In fact, I think that was just after the horse meat scandal, and there was quite a lot of qualification that went into that auction to ensure that the meat was of a sufficient quality, should we say.
Absolutely. So just on this next slide, you guys very kindly filled out a bit of a survey prior to applying for the webinar. Interestingly, about 2/3 of you have not run an auction before. Perhaps, myself and Alun, we're a little bit immersed in this in the day-to-day. We kind of feel that maybe the awareness and experience of e-auctions is more broadly out there. However, you guys are testament to perhaps not. It's still a new endeavor for the majority of us. So hopefully this webinar will prove useful in sharing a bit more of our understanding here. So we'll do our best to go through each of these challenges in turn. There are various segments throughout the webinar which will answer these certain points. However, we've actually written a blog specifically addressing the majority of these. So again, at the end of the webinar, when we share the materials, you'll have a link to that blog where you can read through some of the specific answers in due time.
One of the things we forgot to mention there is that you're welcome to ask questions during the webinar, and we'll endeavour to answer them. We've got a little checklist here for all the kind of questions and challenges people find. So, if we haven't covered them, please keep online and throw the questions on to us. So I believe now we have a little poll, so a bit of interaction you can see on the screen here. So to what extent do you agree with the following statement? I find the concept of e-auctions challenging. And if you could select one of the answers, obviously strongly agree or neither agree or disagree, and then the following on the disagree side as well. We're very keen to understand what the challenges are. We've run a number of surveys in our past. We've got some really nice infographics from our data and from our customers, which we'll show you at the end as handouts. So at the end of the webinar, you're welcome to download these infographics, and we've got the live demonstration as well. So hopefully we're going to cover a lot of that. You'll be able to download the periodic table, the barriers to e-auctions, our e-auction infographic on the statistics. So hopefully if you stay to the bitter end, shall we say, you'll get to download all these extra bits and pieces. So we'll just let this poll run for just another few seconds. I'm just seeing how many people have answered this. Okay. So 75% have answered. Is there anyone else who wants to click a button there? So we have, and we'll do the same kind of poll towards the end, and we'll see how well we've covered all your questions. Okay, so I think we'll show those poll results at the end. So if we move on to an introduction of reverse auctions, so over to my colleague.
Fantastic. So reverse auction, start with a very basic. I'm sure most of you know this, so I'm not going over anything particularly new at this stage. Essentially, a reverse auction is where suppliers compete to supply their goods and services. So you tender a contract and they bid against each other live online, seeing a variety of different bits of feedback of your choosing in order to motivate them, the suppliers, to place further bids. Interestingly, Even Market Dojo, us as a company, have competed in reverse auction before to supply reverse auction software. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, we did win. And we also found out that it made our sales cycle much quicker. It brought additional trust with our client by going through this. And it helped us to see in real time where we stood relative to our competitors. And those are some really valuable bits of feedback that you get from a reverse auction that you wouldn't get in a traditional RFP process. And that's genuine hand on heart, having been through it as a supplier. So the next time you run an auction, and certainly some of you guys mentioned in the survey at the beginning, the concern over getting suppliers involved and what they're going to think of the process, well, take it from us. It can be a real advantage to a supplier to have that feedback, transparency, decision-making all condensed into a very, very limited time frame. So they can be really quite beneficial. Often, the reverse auction, another point to mention here is that it's run on a buyer's choice basis. Certainly the majority of the auctions in Market Dojo are done so. And this gives the buyer the freedom to award to any of the suppliers based on some of the other factors aside from the price. So I know some people feel there's a objection of auctions, it's very price focused. Well, yes, it does focus on price as the negotiation lever. However, the decision itself at the end can be based on many other factors, the service level, the quality, the account management, whatever it might be that you normally use in your decision, your sort of balanced scorecard, if you will. And so this is one of the main challenges outlined in the survey. And so with this buyer's choice, you are protected that you don't have to give the business to the lead bidder, but on that best value bidder. That's an important point to make. So a quick snapshot of some of the results from our auctions. There are many different formats of auction that you can select from, both with us and with other providers as well. The most common by far in our tool is the ranked auction, where suppliers see their position relative to their offer, and they aim to improve it. So for example, they put in a bid of $500,000. They might see themselves in third place. And so they know that they improve their offer to improve their ranking. They may not know how many other bidders are in the auction. They may not know how far off they are from the other bidders. They just know there's work to be done. This is 7 out of 10 done in our tool in this way, the most common. And it generally gets good interaction between bidders, which is why it's so popular. We also have Japanese auctions, where suppliers must accept or decline a bid value. And for those that accept, the value decreases by a certain amount, and they once more have to either accept or decline this new bid value. If they decline, that's it, the auction's over, and it will carry on just with the remaining bidders. And this is a very popular auction where you have limited supplier interaction. You may only have 1 or 2 suppliers taking part. And in fact, just today, this morning, we had a Japanese auction take part for a major retailer, and a single supplier was left in at the end, and the result was very, very promising for the client. Nearly a quarter of our bids are placed in the final extension period, just showing how important this extension is to the overall auction strategy. And that really the overall length of the auction isn't so relevant. We have clients sometimes come to us saying, hey, we should do a 48-hour auction to make sure that everyone has time to place their bids. Well, actually, just do it for 30 minutes, because what often happens is that suppliers are all in there at the end trying to see where they're finishing up. And that's where the key part of the bidding occurs. So on average, people select 30 minutes. So it's short, it's sweet, it's interactive, and it gets the engagement. And to date, we've saved clients about £1.8 billion. So if you work that out over how long we've been going and number of working days and so on, it's about £1 million per working day, which it's something to be proud of.
I think we should be on contingent fee basis, I think. And we often get asked that, but our philosophy is always to be on demand. £500 to run an auction. It's not unusual that someone will call us up and then run an auction on a couple of £1 million worth of contract later in the week. They have other tools to do it, and I think making these auctions more accessible is a great thing, and watching people have that success.
So a little brief wander through history, if I may. We have a little history of auctions, just your classic face-to-face auction method. Well, back in 500 BC, I believe, was the earliest known record of an auction, where in Babylon they used to use auctions to sell a daughter's hand in marriage, which I think is one of the few categories that Market Dojo have not embarked upon.
I can confirm that. We sell no daughters.
Then the innovative Romans used to use auctions quite a bit to sell off spoils of war, such as the land and excess weaponry, that kind of thing. Even the whole of Rome itself was put up on for the auction block. And then as auctions became more widespread, we started to see things called candle auctions, where just in a tavern or a coffee house, a candle was lit in the corner of the room and something was sold, a painting or something like that. And bids were solicited from the room up until the candle had its final splutter and died out, and whoever had placed that final bid was the winner. And then as the internet came about, everything started moving online. Free Markets was one of the earliest pioneers of the reverse auction, as I'm sure many of you know. And they set the company up in 1995, around the same time as Pierre Omidyar from eBay. Free Markets back then used to charge about $250,000 for every single e-auction run on their platform. And interestingly, they used to post out a CD of the software that every supplier who wanted to take part had to then locally install on their laptop, along with this enormous instruction manual on how to operate the software. That was the reverse auction back in 1995. And in the case of eBay, Pierre Omidyar wanted, and I quote here, a central location to buy and sell all kinds of items on a level playing field. And that's the key thing in the business-to-business world as well. It's this level playing field that we're trying to normalize the responses so that the last thing left to negotiate is the price. And the Free Markets business model, it was really more of a consulting firm model than a software one. So throughout the dot-com boom, as reverse auctions became more prevalent, Free Markets began to struggle. The prices tumbled. They could no longer command such a high figure. So in turn, that brought about consolidation, and Ariba eventually buying Free Markets back in 2004 for a fairly hefty price tag. But today we have all manner of auction companies. You can buy new cars like autoebid.com. You can negotiate your logistics. You can buy property through reverse auction. I even considered selling my house through Market Dojo. Sadly, I didn't have enough buyers in the end. You can get freelance labor. There's all sorts of things. I even have used a site called anyvan.com, where you just go on, you say what item you need moving, and suppliers would bid against each other in real time to make their delivery. It's really become a commoditized service, which is essentially what we were trying to pioneer back in 2010 with our pay-as-you-go model for business to business.
Yeah, and since then we've had lots of evolutions, and we've even developed our own marketplace of raw materials called Bonfire. So it's a really interesting space at the moment. Okay, so I'm hoping that those that started the webinar are still there. And now we're just going to have a little chat about the whys of reverse auctions. At the moment, there are a lot of pressures on business to reduce costs. I don't think that's really stopped since all time, but back in 2008, the recession. Moving on from there, times have been tough. A lot of pressure on costs, so there's a lot of economic pressure to save money, and e-auctions can certainly save money, although obviously that's not the only thing they can do. You've got a lot of global competition as well, so the world's a much smaller place. You've got low-cost manufacturing areas that move around the world. So the increased global competition is forcing a lot of companies to focus more on their procurement side of things. Increasing profits. That might sound kind of obvious, but at Rolls-Royce, one of the first things that we kind of took through is the basic understanding that if you make something for £10 and sell it for 11, you've made £1. And then if you take 10% off your costs, you double your profits. Obviously, life's not quite as simple as that, but it's approximately correct in terms of in procurement. If you can save money on your goods and services, you're effectively acting as a sales force because you don't have to sell as much. And the optimization and efficiency. Companies, have to go on year-on-year cost down, supplier rationalization, volume aggregation, process efficiencies. And can eAuctions help with that? Well, we think they can, but we'd be interested to see if you think so as well. I've got a few dilberts in here as well, just in case you might find that a bit more interesting than the slides. The challenges. So what are the challenges of reverse auction? So being price focused is a challenge that we hear a lot. Yes, auctions can be very focused on price. They don't have to be. If they are focused on price, you can mitigate risks through a pre-qualification questionnaire, qualification bids, looking at buyer's choice, bringing the suppliers in. But ultimately, e-auctions, reverse auctions are around saving money if you do negotiate on price, and that's where they work really well. It's just a tool in your tool set. Hurts relationships is another one which we hear quite often, that it damages relationships. In fact, a study done by University of West England found that running reverse auctions actually strengthens relationships due to the transparency that's required in setting up and running the auction. Confidence is another one, hopefully with a little bit of training. This is going to be one of hopefully many internal webinars from Market Dojo, so it'd be nice to mitigate that risk. Incentivization, that's a really interesting one. So how do you incentivize people to save money, to maybe use more reverse auctions? Obviously, that might not be exactly the way to look at it, because saving money is not just about money, it's about cost, it's about the total supply chain, it's about supplier management, it's about contract management. But there's certainly something in there about how you can incentivize people to use the right tools at the right time. We certainly see that reverse auctions could be used in a lot more areas and can save a lot of time in that. Security as well is a really interesting one. We take security very seriously at Market Dojo, and now I think a lot of companies they're very familiar with using SaaS applications, and there's a lot of things out there on the security to help mitigate that risk. And we've got a nice infographic on the barriers to e-auctions which fits into that. Looking at the benefits of reverse auctions, they're very efficient. I remember HomeServe, they ran an auction across 360 postcodes with hundreds of suppliers to negotiate the rates for electrical contractors over half an hour. You'd be very hard pressed doing that over any other means. You've got no geographical constraints, so it's very usual to have an auction with people from around the world. It's very often that we have that. In fact, last year I think 70% of our revenue came from outside the UK, and a lot of the auctions run on an international basis. Intensity of social interaction. So you might be thinking, as I am, what did I mean when I wrote that on the slide? I mean, essentially, it's around. If you think of Sotheby's, for example, when they run an auction, they start obviously it's a forward auction when they run one, but they start the bidding at half the estimated final price because it gets more people involved, more people bidding, more people interacting, and it's that which drives a higher final price. And it's no different for a reverse auction. So it's very important when you're looking at the liquidity in the market and your starting price and the qualification price that you might start higher than you'd like, but that interaction, that involvement helps to drive better prices. You've got the market price. So auctions are great at finding the market price. I think Nick's going to mention a bit later about price compression. So you don't have to go with the lowest bid, you don't have to go with the highest bid, but you can see where the market is. They're very similar to, like, if you look at Go Compare, for example, they all the quotes that come in, you can see the market price. And finally, it's a transparent process. So all steps are very open, giving confidence to the participants and visibility to everyone concerned. I did sit next to a supplier once at dinner, and they turned around to me and said that they'd been last in a lot of auctions. It seems that some suppliers are very happy, perhaps, in just running an RFQ, getting involved, not hearing the result, not getting the business. That's fair enough. But this supplier said to me, "Well, I've been last every time, so I'm not going to partake in any more auctions." And that's one view of it. I think the majority of suppliers that we encounter actually find that transparency really, really helpful to see how they can adjust in the market. It might be a bit of a kick in the teeth sometimes, but that's the truth, and that's what everyone needs to look at. There are benefits for suppliers as well. So it's a very low sales cost to get involved. We have some clients who do all their logistic freight tenders, for example, via an auction. They run 30 auctions a day or whatever, and it's that ability to have all the tenders in one place, interact, get the feedback, and move on. And that's instant market feedback is another real benefit for the suppliers, and it's efficient and transparent, and that's a real boon for the suppliers. And the final bit on the whys here, really want to look at the procurement cycle. I think this is a really important slide. So I think getting over that barrier of, I'm not sure about running an auction, not sure what to prepare, not sure of the documentation. It's no different to before. However, you do need to tie things down. So if you're running a price-only auction, you need the SLAs to nail down. You need to have the terms and conditions nailed down, which can make the preparation period a bit longer. You need to be a bit more careful. You can't have suppliers bidding for apples and pears, for example, unless you run a weighted auction, which is entirely possible, which also needs careful thought. However, once you've done the preparation, the negotiation is so much faster. And after the auction, it doesn't mean you can't have a few suppliers in to discuss the woollier stuff. And then the implementation is much quicker as well, because you've done all that preparation, which just essentially turns into a contract. So traditionally what we find is if you can look at the auction and have that kind of extra preparation period, the whole process ends up much more reduced, and it's a great way of saving time as well as potentially costs. So hopefully you've enjoyed that little section there, and that's on the whys, or why you might want to run a reverse auction. So I'm going to hand you back to my colleague Nick, who's going to discuss the hows.
Fantastic, thank you, Alan. So the how, for the 2/3 of us that have not done an e-auction before. I should begin by just saying it's really not that much different from the process you would currently go through for running a tender. It really isn't. There's a lot of mystery and mystique given as an impression out there about doing an auction. But quite honestly, if you can run a tender, you're most of the way there for being able to do an auction. Because the tenders are all about involving the suppliers, finding, qualifying suppliers, getting bids from them, ensuring the integrity of those bids, ensuring the integrity of the supplier, ensuring the integrity of your specifications, and getting your stakeholders to buy into running that activity on their behalf. The auction is just that little bit at the end that you can just tweak your tender documentation ever so slightly, just to say, we reserve the right to take this to eAuction if we see fit. And broadly speaking, you're most of the way there just by doing that tender process. There's not a lot different to it, just perhaps that little bit of the auction right at the very end. So in terms of your typical process, this is a broad illustration. There are many other sort of facets that can be incorporated into this. But if you were to embark upon doing an auction tomorrow, and you were starting right at the beginning, and you wanted to know what steps you might look to go through, this is broadly how it could work. And as I say, it's very similar to the tender process. It's just step number 5, right at the end there, that takes a slightly different path to your normal RFP kind of process. So there are variants to this, of course, particularly those in public sector. I'm not sure if there are many public sector friends on the line at the minute, but you guys have to be a bit more open and transparent about the process you're going to follow. But again, you can put in your documentation a clause saying we reserve the right to take this to auction if we see fit, and that usually suffices at this point in time. And you'd have to do a particular style of reverse auction that ensures quality and price are combined together in what Alun mentioned earlier, a weighted auction. So the weighted auction, a supplier would get a score for their quality based on their tender outcome, and they would get a score for their commercial based on their pricing and those kind of pricing elements. And those two scores are combined together to give a total score. And the supplier's position, their rank, is defined by those total scores. And so very clearly, the ranking is taking into account both quality and cost in one number. And so those are what public sector would follow, and indeed it can be very, very useful for private sector as well when you want to demonstrate to suppliers in particular that your auction is not just about price. Their rank is going to be quality and price together. So one caveat I'll just add to this process is that even though you might follow down this path to saying, right, we're going to culminate in a reverse auction here, not often is that always the case. For example, we have a particular example that comes to mind for a global facilities management company that wanted us to run an auction for them. This is back in the days of when we offered a consultancy service. And so we embarked upon this journey. We got up to about step number 4 there, the qualification bids. So we got the initial bids from the supply market. And at this point in time, the incumbent's bid came in, and it was quite excessively more expensive than some of the others we had on the table. However, the incumbent spoke to the client and said, look, I know you want to do an auction next, but how about I just give you a £30,000 rebate here and now, and a 20% reduction on our line item pricing here and now, and all this business of the reverse auction, we just kind of make it go away. Obviously, as consultants, we were like, well, clearly we've got this incumbent where we want them. They've been overcharging for many years. Let's see how this market battle will turn out. The client, on the other hand, said, great, £30,000 in the bank and a 20% saving, I'll take it. So that was the end of the process. The auction was never run. So sometimes even the threat of an auction is enough to encourage some very competitive best and final offers.
You could say everyone won in that instance, but you can't help but think what was left on the table. But I guess that's there for next year.
Exactly. So just moving on through these steps very quickly. So category selection is just about what category we'll choose. And that criteria for doing so. The RFQ is just getting together all your tender documentation, as you would normally, as I say. Supplier search, finding capable and qualified suppliers, as you would do normally. Qualification bids, just getting the initial offers from the market. And there's some really good reasons for doing so before doing an auction. Then the auction itself, and then back over to business as normal, awarding the contract. So very, very similar to your normal process. And we go next slide. So category selection then. This is one of the sort of more challenging areas to look at. So ultimately, to negotiate something, you need to know what you're buying quite clearly, hence the definition. To do this, you just need to go through the detail. You put up your spend data, put the spend data into what we would call market-facing categories or supply market categories, i.e. that's not something that you have internally categorized, but how that aligns to the supply market itself. So getting rid of all categories called miscellaneous and put them into whatever they should be: stationery, printing services, accommodation, and so on. I do remember working for a large firm in the construction industry who had over 500,000 lines of spend data and wanted to do some auctions. And within that data, they spent £6 million a year on miscellaneous. So yeah, good luck trying to get a saving out of that category. The savings potential, this is really just about trying to make sure you're going to get return on investment for your efforts, both in time and money. So you want to maximize your savings, your returns. So you've got to look at your categories with questions like, okay, are my specifications readily available? Or am I going to have to spend months trying to dig this detail out? How much of my category actually consists of non-negotiable content? For example, negotiating energy, you're largely reliant upon the market pricing from wholesalers. So the actual saving you can get with a broker, for example, can be almost single-digit percentage, even though you might have many millions of spend. You could ask the question of, when did I last carry out a negotiation on this category? And what approach did I take? Did I last auction it 6 months ago? Or perhaps actually this is a category that's been very badly managed and has never been looked at for several years. So these all give you a good feel for the level of savings you might expect to get. Liquidity, that's the term just about having enough capable and interested suppliers in the market. Whilst you can have auctions with just a few suppliers, broadly speaking, the more competition, the more bids, the better savings. So, look at your category by the attractiveness that the business is to the supply market. Obviously big contract values are going to have more interaction from suppliers. The complexity that it will take for suppliers to understand your needs and to bid for it is going to affect it. You might get attrition if you've got a category that's very, very time consuming from the supplier point of view. If you don't have good liquidity, i.e. few suppliers involved, then your auction is less likely to succeed. So the key there is get more suppliers if you can. And this is within your control. So I know there was a few years ago, the Crown Commercial Service looked to run an auction on stationery, but they aggregated the entire stationery across the UK, some several £100 million worth of contract. Well, clearly only a few suppliers could cater for the needs on that kind of scale. But breaking it down into constituent parts, making it into smaller lots, would increase the number of suppliers that could get involved in this and hence increase that competition. And that's what you want to look at with your lotting. And lastly, the timescales, that's just looking at, or the scheduling, just looking at some of the barriers for doing the auction. For example, am I locked in a contract with a supplier? How easy would it be for me to switch supplier? How long would it take me to gather specifications? All these kind of bits of information that would just help you get an understanding of how quickly you can turn around the process. Because ideally, you want a category that you can get on and get that win in the short term, whereas others you're going to have to build up for the longer term. These RFQs, the specifications, essentially. This is just the assembly of all the information you like to communicate to your suppliers. As I say, this is not much different from doing a normal tender. Very, very similar. Perhaps the only slight variance on this is that you just have to be a bit more clear in your detail. Take a bit more time to outline the final few bits of detail. And the lot structure is the key as well. So if we look at those things, spend value, just relating to how much value and hence profit the suppliers are likely to gain by winning the business. So they can make an early decision on how much resource they're going to put into the tender and the potential auction. Specifications, hopefully you've got them all. They're all accurate, they're available. And this can be everything from engineering drawings to delivery profiles for logistics to raw material grades for raw materials and so on. whatever it is that you need to clearly define your spend. The lot structure is the slightly technical part, a bit more sort of scientific. The idea is that you create a structure that just gets maximum bidding from suppliers. So referencing that Crown Commercial Service example again. Basically segment your lots back into those market-facing categories. So instead of having one lot called office supplies, for example, split it out into paper, IT consumables, furniture, stationery, and then you can invite suppliers that are specialists in those individual areas, those specialist IT consumables or those specialist paper manufacturers, and they can then compete heavily on their particular area of spend and drive that competition. And in the meantime, you might have suppliers, the big guys, who can do everything, but they're being pushed in all corners by these niche specialists. And the final part of the RFQ or the tender is just that main document that pulls everything together. It really details your service levels. I remember being on a client site for a national newspaper producer for one of their project kickoffs. And one of their stakeholders was firmly against doing an auction on their category. And this goes back to one of the points that you guys raised in the survey. And his objection was that the new suppliers just simply won't understand what was required to fulfill the service. We asked for more detail, pressed on that point. And the guy said, well, for example, the incumbent knows that for this particular delivery to a newsagent, the delivery has to be placed behind the wheelie bins at the back of the shop. And no new supplier is going to know that. And the reason being that newsagent wasn't up that time of the morning to collect the delivery. And so we kind of just said, well, okay, if that's part of the specification, let's put it in the document. Let's say for this delivery, you have to put it behind the wheelie bins for this newsagent. And then every single new supplier knows that is part of the service level. And that's just the key to it, really, just bottoming out every little bit of service that in many cases lives inside someone's head. That can be the challenge of drawing it out. But it's just going through the micro detail, and that's what drives the accuracy and the success of the auction.
And that's a great advantage for the future as well, because once you've got this down, the subsequent years, you've got all that detail in one place, and it makes everyone's lives a lot easier that the knowledge is finally captured.
Brilliant. Supplier search. I won't go too much detail here. You guys know how to find suppliers. So the easiest place to start is, of course, your incumbents. Having a real good look at them as to what makes them successful, what doesn't make them successful in some cases, to ensure that they're bought into the process, had clear communication as to what you're doing and why you're doing it, to make sure that they're engaged. Just be clear with them, be upfront. Google them, stick them on Google and you'll see what competitors come up against their name. That's always useful, a bit of finding new suppliers that can compete. And have a good look through their materials. You might be surprised from their website or marketing materials what you like about that supplier, what you don't like about that supplier. And you can then use that information in your search for new suppliers. And in terms of the new suppliers, place to start is just defining your criteria. What is it you are looking for in a supplier? What does that great supplier look like to you? List it all down. It could be their turnover, so a certain size, minimum, maximum. Geography, accreditations, the facilities that they run, the employees that they have, the policies. Do they have good corporate social responsibility, environmental policies, this kind of thing that are all important into your outcome. Ask colleagues, ask your stakeholders. They all know a few suppliers. Use associations like Compass, SIPs. SIPs have got a good online resource tool. Use LinkedIn. That's always a good place to search for suppliers. Alibaba, even for eSourcing. I mean, there's loads. And don't forget that any organization you do speak to, even if the supplier is turning you down, ask them who else they might know. Suppliers are always a good source of referrals, and that includes us. If you're looking to do an auction with Market Dojo, give us a call. We've had tens of thousands of qualified suppliers in our tool, and we're always happy just to run a quick check and just make some recommendations. against your particular category. I'm sure there'll be some in there that we can put forward for you. So you've done your tender package, you've found your suppliers you want to involve, you get the package out to them, get the bids going. This stage, the qualification bids, it's a real cool key step between taking the suppliers that you've potentially only dealt with for the very first time during the tender and turning them into qualified suppliers that you'd be happy to consider for an award. And the qualification bids is an essential step prior to the auction for that. It gives you that real key understanding of, who of my supply base wants to bid. Have they understood my requirements? So you're very much looking for those outliers. Again, another one of the challenges that you guys mentioned in the survey was, how do you make sure that suppliers aren't offering prices that they can't sustain? Well, you're looking for trends. You're looking for making sure that they're all in line with the general market, that market price that Alun mentioned. And if those bids aren't looking accurate, we'll challenge the suppliers on that. Make sure you go back to them. Maybe they've misunderstood something, or maybe they've over compromised for something, whatever it might be. Make sure you understand it. You may even not have any bids at all, in which case it's back to the drawing board and let's have a further interaction with the suppliers to see why that might be. You can then check the liquidity in each lot. Is your lot structure correct? Have you set it up in the right way to maximize that participation? Sometimes we find that certain lots are ignored. Perhaps suppliers just cannot do that particular service, in which case we need to think, maybe we take this out of the auction, we handle it offline with the incumbent. Maybe some lots have got fantastic liquidity. Maybe actually the suppliers can do everything, in which case you could simplify the auction and just have one lot rather than breaking it down if everybody can bid for everything. The third aspect is the more comforting one, that comfort blanket of, do I have some savings? Ideally, if you're going to involve stakeholders and beam that auction up in front of 70 people in your theatre at work, as indeed happened with our very first auction at Market Dojo, slightly nervy moment, a lot of fingers were crossed. You could have that comfort factor that you've already got savings on the table, you've got good competition, so chances are this auction's gonna work.
I remember we had an audience for that auction, didn't we?
Audience was there. Mobile phones were strictly told to turn them off. Didn't want any collusion going on here. It was thankfully a very, very good auction in the end. So yeah, it's all about that due diligence that you've done up to that stage. And finally, you can use all of these points just to decide what your best strategy is going to be. One of the other points in the survey was, how do you know which type of auction to use? Clearly, 70% of our auctions are ranked, so that's a firm favorite. But things that you might decide would be, okay, where are incumbents positioned in each lot? The last thing you want to do is run an auction with your incumbent winning the whole thing at the start and winning the whole thing at the end. It puts them in a very, very strong position. That is if they haven't had to make any revision of their offer. Makes it difficult to go back to them afterwards. So have a look at where your incumbent is to make sure that it looks like they're going to be challenged. You want to look at how close the bids are. If the bids are nice and close, then ranked auctions should be good. You get that interaction, which is key. If the bids are quite far apart, you might look at a Japanese auction. That's good for that aspect. Otherwise, you could just add in an extra step into the process, which is to set some target pricing. I remember doing a plastic injection moldings auction. We involved 1,500 suppliers. I appreciate that's not for everybody, but I was a consultant back then. I had lots of time on my hands. And we had about 600 or so take part in the auction itself. But during that stage, because we had so many bids, we were just able to set round after round of target pricing to eliminate suppliers from the process prior to even doing the auction. And that just meant that the suppliers you're left with at the end, we knew that they were very close together on price and that this auction is going to get that interaction. And then, rarely any of the auctions involved on Market Dojo involve any supplier training. Again, that was another point on the survey you guys fed back to us. How do you do supplier training? Well, majority of our auctions don't. And hopefully you'll see, during the demo that the software is pretty easy, but really it comes from the good communication from the client base, from you guys, making clear documentation, including their specifications, being very clear as to what the process will be, so suppliers firmly understand it. And then things like the qualification round or the tenders, if you run a RFP process through Market Dojo in advance, then suppliers have already got a good feel for how the software behaves and how it works.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, the qualification bid round is such an important. It's all about mitigating risk if you're new to eAuctions, and qualification bids are really that final step to ensure that you don't run into an auction and everything go belly up. So it's a really important step.
So last few points on this. The auction, we have made it to the auction day. The auction itself can be quite a frantic period. Particularly the guys here in the office love dialing in and watching client auctions with them and offering that bit of hand-holding through the process. But quite honestly, the hard work has been done by this stage through those earlier steps in the process, so that by the time the auction comes around, you guys are confident it's going to work. You've done your groundwork. You've engaged the suppliers. You understand their bids and where they're coming from. But always a good plan to have some contingencies in place. You can proxy bid on behalf of suppliers. So, if a supplier's internet does go down, you can offer a bid on their behalf with their permission. Keep your telephone lines clear, because people will potentially give you a call during it. And get your message board at the ready to fire out little messages to suppliers to help them here and there. But as I said before, typically the auctions are 30 minutes long with that extension period. So, we have seen 72-hour auctions before, but really nothing happened for about 71.5 hours of that auction. And just right at the very end, all the bids came in, even though it was multi-time zone. I think that was also a point on the survey at the beginning. But the online message board is a good way to make sure that everyone's getting informed as to what to do next, and keeping that communication channel open. The auction is not a robot. It is still that human interaction on both sides. So it's important to keep that flow of communication. One interesting characteristic to look for during the auction is that price compression. Alun mentioned the market price. Well, what you hopefully see during the course of the auction is where the bids get closer and closer together, and they're all sort of converging at around the same price level. And this is where you could hand on heart say where the market price is. We see it time and time again, 3 or 4 suppliers all around the same kind of price level. So back to some of your concerns or challenges during the survey around the suppliers being underpricing and so on, you can see typically quite clearly where a supplier has underpriced their service, and it'll stick out like a sore thumb on the graph. So that's one of the main advantages of the ranked auction, getting that kind of compression. One of the questions we saw from the panel was when best to run an auction in terms of day of the week. Well, we actually see majority of our auctions happening midweek, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I guess fitting in with the Western working world. Mondays and Fridays slightly less common. Typically we give suppliers a few days of the week to get into the swing of things, but only by a few percent less common, not massive outliers. And Saturday and Sunday, yeah, very, very unpopular, apart from our Middle Eastern client base on Sunday. We see a fair few auctions run then. Finally, the award decision. Well, this is back to your business as normal, really. I mentioned that auctions are largely done on buyer's choice. So even though you've got as your suppliers who negotiated on price, your decision is still going to potentially come down to the combination of other factors. If you've done your weighted auction where you've incorporated quality in the bid, then that's already been done. But very important to give feedback to suppliers to thank you for their time. You might need them again in a year or two's time. It's very popular for auctions to be rerun a year or two later. And then just give them a bit of feedback as to why they have or have not been successful. Always appreciated. And take it from us as a supplier as well. It can be very useful to get a signed copy of the bids, make sure everything's legally binding, and get it appended into the contract itself. And then lastly, anything outside the auction process, you have the implementation with the chosen supplier, and that's back to you guys as to your normal process. But you could look at trials, you could look at samples, whatever it may be, to ensure that that supplier is genuinely up for it. And that's pretty much it from the how.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's put this into practice now, and we'll see if we can run an event on Market Dojo. Hopefully, this is where not everyone drops off. It's our pièce de resistance, should we say? But what we'll do very quickly is set up an auction and show you what a reverse auction looks like. So at the moment, we're in the Market Dojo tool. You can all register for free and go into the sandpit. And if you go into the sandpit, you can do what I'm doing and have a look at running various types of auctions. So what I'm going to do now is just set up an auction very quickly, and then show you what it looks like running. I've got my colleagues are going to be bidding furiously against each other. So let's pick something which I can spell. So laptops. We could run. I'll mention a few features, but really I'll just try and get to the auction at the end. So you can run multi-currency event, edit the email that goes out, run our PQQs, RFQ, multi-scored, multi-weighted questionnaires, weighted events. But I'm just going to run a very simple auction. And you know what? I'm not going to go into the details here. I'm going to show you those details during the actual auction itself. So unfortunately, it's taking me back to the login screen then, so I'll just log back in. I'll just set that up again. That was fun. That was all part of the demo. Let's just set that back up there. So go to the next step. Here we go. I just need to make sure I'm in the sandpit. There we go. Sorry, excuse me there. So I'm just going to do that for the third time. They say 3 times lucky. So here we go. So after you set the event conditions there, you can create the lot. You've got an advanced lot you can do with multiple different components: participant entered, host entered, calculations, different decimal places, unit of measure sets. But you know what? A lot of people just run a very simple structure. They might have 3 bids on their desk. They want to run an auction, and I'm going to just run one on laptops with a current price and qualification price. So there we go. I've set up a lot, and we'll see how that looks in a few minutes. You can obviously add documents to the event. You could share them with different people. You can hide them. You can have down various barriers. But now what I'm going to do is just invite our sandpit suppliers. So here we go. So added 3 suppliers, and I've gone live. Now the emails have gone to the suppliers. The suppliers will typically click on the link. They'll register on the Market Dojo system very easily. They'll accept the invitation. Hopefully they'll read the documents, which is always a bonus. And we can see if they've downloaded them, but obviously we can't actually tell if they've read them. And then they will hopefully put in the qualification bids, which are just such an important stage. I remember working with a very large German company. I think it was Bosch, SPX began Bosch. And they initially didn't want the qualification bids there, but when they started using them, they found them invaluable. As you can see at the moment, the screen's kind of updating as suppliers will register and log into the event. So you can see really what's going on in real time. Here we have the qualification bid stage. So if I just click on this here, you can see I've had 3 qualification bids from suppliers. I won't show you that. I'll show you supplier bidding in a second. So I can look at this and say, hey, all the suppliers around the same point. I'm running a ranked auction. That probably works. If needed, you can proxy bid for a supplier, but they will get an email from that to prevent shilling, etc. Now, what we'll do here is we'll just make the auction live. In the meantime, I don't know if Nick, you want to see if there's any questions here we haven't answered from the audience.
Let's see. Stakeholder buy-in. Not sure we've fully addressed that one, but the concept of engaging a stakeholder in the process, why might they be interested? Well, as Alan alluded to at the beginning, the benefits. It's their budget. If they could get better value for the budget to reinvest in other areas, then that could be one good reason. I know sometimes budgets are a bit funny, that you don't want to, solicit bids for less than your budget in case your budget gets removed for the following year. But certainly, being able to reinvest budgets into something better is always useful. It demonstrates that you're getting best value, which is always good. In many cases, I know auctions, people say they're focused on price, but suppliers, if you particularly cast the net wider, you can often find suppliers who are, that needle in the haystack, that fantastic supply partner that you may otherwise never have found, that can just give you a fantastic service, maybe even innovation on what you were using or buying from previously.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. And we're back in. The auction is now running. I mean, you saw me set up the auction there. It's really quick and easy. And I think it's important to say that trying to make an auction difficult in the setup is not the aim of the game. You want everything to be easy. And a lot of our customers will run auctions in this way, just a very simple lot. It's very easy to see what's going on. It's not to say you can't be more complicated, but this is a very standard kind of auction format where people can save many thousands of pounds. If it was a weighted auction, obviously the rank of the supplier would be based on price and quality, for example. In this case, it's just price. You can see here that people are bidding away. Now I could pause the auction if I wanted to. I can change the settings. These are quite kind of standard within auction software. So I can extend the auction. I can create a dynamic close. A dynamic close is if someone's bid in the last X minutes, it gets extended. You can apply that just to the top 3 suppliers, for example. So the tire kickers at the bottom don't prolong the auction. You could change the minimum and maximum bid decrement, which is fantastic for avoiding errors. And avoiding it coming down a penny at the time. You can see here that the price is going down as my colleagues bid against each other. Here you can see a really nice graph here. So surprise, surprise, we've got a lovely interactive auction. In all fairness, this is very typical. You get suppliers interacting with each other. We've got a lot of guides and resources on the website, by the way. One of them is around the psychology of online negotiation events and countering things like bid shadowing, for example, where some incumbent is just following the other supplier, and how you can counteract that with maybe a big jump, for example. So this is a very typical way of running the auction. If I just show you what it's like for a supplier, so I'm going to act as supplier number 3. You can see the supplier is now in 2nd place, now in 3rd place. The guys are bidding furiously. I'm going to put a bid of 920 in. Place the bid. Are you sure? There we go. I'm back in 1st place, so I feel pretty good about myself. If I want, I can send everyone a message. I am winning. Although in all fairness, we do say, any messages that come in that you reply to, you should treat all the suppliers fairly. I think it's very important to take a very professional approach to running an auction, because it will help your reputation and encourage suppliers to take part in your next event. So I think the way you treat your suppliers before, during, and after the auction is crucially important with respect to getting that interaction in the future as well. As Nick pointed out, a lot of our customers will run an auction 1 year, and then a year's time they'll do the same type of thing. And in all fairness, as I said, this is very typical for an auction. You're looking at price compression. If the supplier makes a wrong bid, you can delete it. If their bid is particularly low, you could discount them from the auction. And also, you're looking for that market price. And in all fairness, that's all there is to running a reverse auction. You can see it's very easy. You can see the message come up here, and if I were to reply to the message, I can mark as read, and I can send a reply to one supplier or all suppliers.
I'll just interject. We've just got a few questions from the delegates coming in. So we've got one question here about what does shilling mean?
That's a very, very good question. So shilling is really bidding. You might have heard that on eBay. So it's bidding for someone else, as it were, or putting fake bids in. So if I was, for example, going to act as a supplier and put fake bids in to get the other suppliers to reduce their bids, that would be illegal. It's called shilling. You can probably see how fraudulent it is. I don't think we've ever had a case of that at Market Dojo. And I think the important thing is, I think one of the questions we had was around the interaction. If you get enough suppliers involved, you will get the interaction and you will get the bidding. It might not happen to the last 5 minutes, so hold your horses. But yeah, that's what shilling is.
Fantastic, thanks. So we have another question saying, do suppliers need to meet the qualification price in order to participate in the auction and start bidding? If they enter the value above it, do they not take part? Well, the qualification price, if you have set one, then yes, the suppliers need to meet that threshold in order to take part in the auction. It's a useful facility to make sure that the suppliers you've got involved in the process are all in the same kind of ballpark. If someone is 2, 3, 4 times more expensive than everybody else and their quality difference is negligible, then quite frankly, they're potentially wasting their time engaging further in the process. So you can use the qualification price to make sure that everyone's in the same area. That said, it is an optional price that you can set. So if you don't want to have one, just don't use it. And then essentially any supplier is able to take part at any price level of their choosing.
And it's a really interesting point, and you can take it into a lot of game theory. So we have some customers who want to start the qualification pricing, make some immediate savings, which is good. However, if it cuts down the liquidity in the event, as in cuts down the number of suppliers, that can really be a burden and might affect your final price. So whether you set your qualification price, if you set it above or below the current price, there is no hard and fast rule. I would personally tend to say you want to get the interaction in the event, so generally don't be too harsh with it, but there may be reasons you do that.
Fantastic. And we've got one other great question here of if we are tracking bids against a lot, e.g. workshop tools with 10 tools in the lot, how do we cater for the fact that we don't actually buy the tools as a kit equal to the content of the lot, but may buy more of one tool than another within the lot? Well, in this, we're getting into potentially a sort of bill of materials type auction, where we can use the advanced lots facility in the tool. Alun just showed you the simple lots in this case. But in the advanced lots, you can build up items that constitute your overall lot. And within those items, you could have each item would have its own quantity and unit of measure and various other elements to it as well. So you could say I need 10 of these tools, 15 of them, 20 of those, 1 of them, 100 of the other, and all of those together aggregate up to a total that the software can calculate for you. And so suppliers during the auction can price up the items individually, which then gives the overall lot. Or you may decide to just bid the auction at the total level, and then afterwards suppliers have to price up their breakdown, and the software will verify that their breakdown equates to the same value as their overall total in the auction. So that's an approach you can take to cater for that. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, and we've got some really nice, I mean, our resources hub on our website, we've just spent a great deal of time upgrading it. I think we thought it would take a month, and I think it's taken about 12 months, but it's a fantastic section of resources. And if you want to see some articles on there on the transformational bidding piece, which you can use the advanced lots for, that's really exciting. So we're coming towards the end. We've got a few more slides and the poll results. So if you guys can take part in the poll, that will show the results in a second. So following this demo and the webinar, to what extent do you agree with the following statement? I find the concept of eAuctions challenging. So please select one of those. So what we're hoping is that
we've done our job.
We've done our job, and everyone's going to find them very less daunting. So we'll have that. We'll just look at some of the questions that we may not have answered while you're doing this. So one of them was quality matrix. Someone's interested in a quality matrix. And I think we presume that's around price against quality and how you can take advantage of that. I mean, we have some tenders which are run with some very complex questionnaires which have multiple scoring, multiple weighting, multiple scorers, and take in a lot of facets from HR, health and safety, security, etc., and weigh those against the price. So you also have a lot of kind of quality considerations in there, quality, you know, ISO, etc. So I think that was what the question was regarding. That could be as part of a weighted event. We have something around integration upstream and downstream. So we, you know, Market Dojo, where we take the integrations, as Nick mentioned earlier, very importantly. And you know, we have an open API which is well documented, so we look at interfacing with Market Dojo and exporting out of Market Dojo.
Yeah. In terms of potential other integration, if you mean with the procurement process, so yeah, you can run your RFP in the tool first, then decide to do the auction, and then decide later to manage your contract in the tool. So it interfaces in those kind of ways as well.
Fantastic. So that the poll's coming to a close now. I think we've got about 70% of people have answered it. If anyone else wants to do a final click, we'll close it in 10 seconds. And then we'll come on to the last few slides and the results of the poll. In fact, Toby, would you like to do the results of the poll now? Okay, so let's show you the results of the very first poll. It's quite exciting. So to what extent do you agree with the following statement? I find the concept of auctions challenging. So we've got about 37% which are above the neutral, and about 36% which are below, which is really interesting. It certainly suggests, given that people haven't done auctions, you should be giving us a call to run a couple of auctions maybe. And this is going to be quite exciting. Let's have a look at the second poll to see how we did. Oh well, I'm pretty pleased with that.
Phew, I think it's a sigh of relief.
I'm not sure what we'd have said if that had gone the other way. But you know, hopefully that is a fair reflection on.
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think, you know, you guys know how to run tenders. It's really not much different. It's just that little bit at the end with that dynamic negotiation. You know, you guys do all the hard work day to day. So yeah, I hope that more of you might consider an auction for the next negotiation opportunity.
Okay, and then we've just got a final few slides for you, so just a couple more minutes. So a couple of, there's about 4 slides, but all very interesting things.
Yeah, just to wrap things up, guys, just you know, a little bit more about some use cases. So some snapshot of client take up at the moment. So Greco, they actually use our tool to do between 20 and 30 reverse auctions every single day. They use spot buy freight. You know, Greco, they're moving around big generators, and they have a big pool of preferred vendors, you know, just freight forwarders and logistics providers with big lorries. And every single day they need these generators moved around depending on, you know, client engagement, whether it's Super Bowl 1 minute to St. Andrews Golf the next, whatever it might be. and they just throw it out to auction amongst their preferred pool of suppliers. And we've actually done a talk at eWorld on this subject about how auctions can be a very, very effective and just quick and easy way of getting and negotiating price for spot buying. So the next time you need to get some printed materials or some freight or some insurance, you can, if you're doing things repeatedly with a very clear spec each time, you could just throw it out to your preferred pool of suppliers. And they've got some fantastic data. And then you got you guys like Travis Perkins, who've done a lot of auctions on direct and indirect spend, and guys like EMA, who have auctioned everything from CCTV to lifeguards to even entire shopping malls. So some really interesting use cases. And just very quickly on Market Dojo, why do people use us? Well, we're effective, we get the job done. We're Alun, myself, and others. We're procurement people by background here, so we kind of understand procurement. We've got a lot of advanced capabilities in the tool, as well as the simple. So from people buying that car for themselves, even myself, I tended my house extension through Market Dojo, bought a new kitchen through it, all the way up to some very, very sophisticated use cases. We have our customer success team to help be on the end of the phone for any hands-on support. We're flexible. We cater for people just coming along doing a one-off auction, all the way through to some big enterprises doing some very, very big, clever things with the tool. And why we're different, we've got our sandpit where people can just jump in and build their own auction and try it out, just as Alun did today in that demo. You guys could do that yourselves right now. We put our pricing on the website. We're one of the only providers to do that. And we live by that. We all live and die by that.
Going to auctions on that.
We have to be clear. We have to be competitive. So hopefully it makes it very easy for procurement professionals to decide what ROI they'll get with us. And we give that personal touch. We're just a bunch of individuals really, and we like working one-to-one with people and help get that success.
Very much so. We very much enjoy working with our customers. And it's a lot of fun, this journey. We really do have a fantastic resources hub if you get a chance to go on there. The guys in the team have spent a very long time categorizing everything, so some really good resources. Here are a couple of resources now who I believe you can download now from your the webinar widget, from the download tab. So if you go into your download tab, you should be able to download these two resources very easily. They are also on our Market Dojo website. But the first one is eAuctions, based on data that we've gathered from our various hosts.
It's the handout tab, I believe.
The handout tab. Yeah, so the handout tab, if you see the handout tab on the little widget for the webinar, and a study into the barrier adopting reverse auctions. So we did quite a large, sizable survey, collated everything. I think this is our second updated infographic on that, which has a bit more explanation. So please download that. And then I think that brings us on to our last slide. We've got another exciting webinar coming up on the 21st of May, which is a notable date because it's the day after my birthday. Feel free to send some birthday cards for the 20th of May. But this webinar is going to be very exciting with John Hanson, looking at how procurement departments can evolve using digital tools, looking at change. Apart from that, I think we've addressed most of the questions, all the questions. Please feel free to email us with any more. It's been really exciting for us doing this first webinar with two of the co-founders here. Maybe we'll get the third Nick involved as well. So drag him out. And obviously we've been supported here by the marketing team. That's Toby, Callum, and Craig. And yeah, just thank you very much. It's a goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him. Thank you very much all. Much appreciated.
Take care. Bye.